When the temple stood in Jerusalem, our priests tended a powerful sacred fire. As it says in Leviticus, Eish tamid tukad al hamizbeach lo tichbe. A eternal flame you shall place on your altar. It shall never go out. We tended that fire, that powerful sacred fire, for perhaps up to 500 years, maybe more. That fire was at the center of our temple, which was at the heart of our land-based culture. As an agricultural people, we brought the fruits of the land to that fire. During Pesach, we brought the first barley, and during Shavuot, the first wheat, and during Sukkot, we brought the ingathering harvest to that fire and fed the Creator directly. It was how we connected ourselves and our land straight to the Creator. Well, almost 2,000 years ago, the temple was destroyed, and with it, the fire was put out. The rabbis faced a traumatic survival moment, and they did a revolutionary thing. In contradiction to their own prohibition of writing the oral Torah, in a sense, they gathered the seeds from the ancestral garden, dried them, and wrote them into the 6,000 pages of the Talmud. In that moment, we went from being a people of the land to a people of the book. I think that the intellectualization of our earth-based tradition was a profound survival strategy. But as we know from basic psychology, a survival strategy in one stage of life can become a profound limitation in another. This reminds me of a moment when I felt like my fire went out. I'll never forget returning home halfway through law school for a winter break. I was back in my childhood bathroom. I can still remember the faded yellow wallpaper and the bright red towels that my mom loved so much, and how clean the mirror was. And I looked at my own eyes in that mirror, and I took note of the dark rings underneath and the bloodshot eyes. And I could feel the constriction of anxiety in my chest and the heaviness of depression in my mind. And I looked at my anxiety medications, and I thought to myself, I need to find another way. So let me tell you a little bit about how I got there and how I found my journey back to my alignment and found my path. Growing up in Spokane, Washington, a one synagogue town, I loved Judaism. I loved helping Rabbi Jack facilitate Kabbalah Shabbat, and I loved the community so much. I became the president of Spokane Jewish Youth, both my junior and senior year of high school. But after graduating high school and leaving home, I had to find my own way, my own path, and Judaism somehow lost its shimmer. It didn't seem to have the tools to help me find my way in life. But I found that in the wilderness. I'll never forget my first backpacking trip before going off to college. It was in western Montana, and we were high in the Rockies, and something about that clean air and the beautiful mountains, my soul soared there. My first job out of college, I became a park ranger in Alaska at Kenai Fjords National Park. While helping sea kayakers in trouble get back to safety, I also spent a lot of my time communing with the bald eagles and the humpback whales. I was captivated by the rivers of ice that came from the glaciers and carved out the fjords. You might say that I found God in the wilderness. But the second half of the thing that I loved so much was missing, my Jewish community. So I had to return home. Now, upon returning home, the voice that was a little bit quiet earlier became stronger and stronger and sort of overrode that voice of alignment, that wild voice I found in the wilderness. When are you going to get a real job? You see, my father was a doctor, and my brother had followed in his footsteps too. And in myself, I encountered a survival strategy that really took over, finding security in professionalism. So I chose to go to law school, to fight for the thing that I loved so much. I was a great lawyer. But in those endless days, and sometimes far too frequent nights, deep inside my computer and lost in my legal mind, I got lost. I felt so far from the things I loved, and I felt so far from my own alignment. Now I'm wondering, how many of you have encountered some experience of disconnection like that in your lives? Well, Richard Liu wrote a book where he coined some language around this. In Last Child in the Woods, he coined the phrase nature deficit disorder. He correlated the wired generation's lack of connection to nature to very scary trends of depression, attention disorders, obesity, and really scary statistics around increasing teen suicide. Now, lost in my legal mind, I didn't know much about nature deficit disorder, but I knew that something had to change. And when a friend of mine came to me and said to me, you can go to the wilderness with a guide in a supportive community and pray for help to find your purpose in life. You seem a little lost. When I heard that, I jumped at the chance. So in the summer of 2007, I went out to the California-Nevada border, and there, high on the mountains, I sat for 4 days and 4 nights, alone, fasting, and praying for help, praying for healing, praying for a vision for my life. Now, I encountered a really deep hunger out there, and I encountered a mind-spinning loneliness. But about 3 days into the experience, I went through what I can only describe as a visceral portal, where I encountered a peace that I had never known, and a connection that I cannot describe in words. But on that final morning, with my tallis wrapped around my shoulders, my tzitzit wound tightly around my finger, I prayed the Shema as our rabbis have instructed before the sunrise. And after saying that last word of the Shema, Echad, I opened my eyes and just caught that first blast of fire on the eastern horizon. And with that glimpse of fire, a small message: get your people back to nature. In hindsight, this was one of the most Jewish experiences I have ever had. And with that experience, I began looking for an understanding of how I can root that in Judaism. And I didn't have to look very far, because the Torah is chock full of stories of our mothers and fathers, the prophets, going to the wilderness to find healing, to seek connection, and to bring vision for their lives. Avram, he's told by God, Lech lecha, leave home and go to yourself. And where's the first place that he goes? He goes to Alon Moreh. He goes to a tree that teaches him. And right then, he receives the vision of his life to become the father of a great nation. And Miriam, after the exodus from Egypt into the wilderness, she encounters her purpose by discovering the well and bringing waters to the people so they don't die of thirst in the wilderness. And her brother Moshe, perhaps he's most instructive of all. Having killed one of the slave taskmasters in Egypt and running for his life, he disappears in Midian. We later encounter him achar bamidbar, in the farthest end of the wilderness in Exodus chapter 3. And there he encounters the mystical burning bush, and he turns aside. And then God says to him, Moses, take off your shoes from your feet, for you are standing on holy ground. Now, quite literally, taking your shoes off and connecting to the earth is a powerful strategy for grounding and for becoming present. But we learned something else from that Hebrew in the text. Sha'al nalecha, remove your shoes, also can mean unlock, take the locks off. Me'al raglecha, from your feet, can also mean from your habits. Moses, unlock yourself from your habits. There in the wilderness, Moshe has a profound transformation. And then he begins to return with a vision to become the liberator of his people. Now, you might think this is a powerful story for Moshe and the prophets, but it's not so. It says right in the first lines of Genesis, Adam, the earthling, comes from Adamah, the earth. That is you. And that is you. This experience is available to all of us. But far too often, we fail to go back to the wilderness for that experience. Time of connection. And perhaps going to the wilderness in those most difficult times when we need transformation is a really good idea and a very Jewish experience. Olaf Dalla Gordon perhaps described it best in 1910. One of the prophets of the early labor Zionist movement. He said, when you return to nature, your eyes will be opened and you will gaze straight into the eyes of nature. In the mirror, you will see your own image and you will know that you have returned to yourself. Because when you hid from nature, you hid from yourself. Now, my teacher, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, Zichrona Livracha, he gave me a teaching that's related to this. In his work, he understood that Judaism in this powerful time of change needs to be understood and reinterpreted and repurposed for a time of great change and challenge. In his 1989 work, Paradigm Shift, he specifically said one powerful thing that has always stuck. And we talked about this frequently. He said that we need to renew our Judaism with a Gaian consciousness, to understand that we Jews and all people on earth are part of one interconnected living planet. So with that spark from the mountain, the teachings from the Torah, and mentorship from my Rebbe, I helped co-found Wilderness Torah with a mission to awaken and celebrate the earth-based traditions of Judaism through multi-generational, land-based festivals, kids programs entirely in nature, and a new training institute to help Jewish leaders across the world rekindle the flame within Judaism. At the heart of Wilderness Torah's work is not just to tell the stories, to bring us back into the stories. And we're not just endeavoring to take Judaism and Jewish tradition out into the wilds, but bring the wilds back into Judaism. Because when we do, Judaism comes to life. People's fire lights up again. Take Sukkot on the farm, for example. We gather for 4 days on an organic farm. We celebrate the harvest, gunny sack races, harvesting strawberries. We celebrate Shabbat. We eat wonderful, delicious food. But imagine at the apex of our festival, we recount the Simcha Beit HaShoeva, the ancient festival of the water drawing. It says if you haven't seen this festival, you've never seen joy in your life. That's what the Mishnah tells us. And we do this. We don't just tell the story, we bring it to life. Imagine gathering 250 people around a fountain in the evening, lit up with beautiful blue and yellow and green lights. And 250 people gathered around this fountain, singing and dancing, ouds playing, drums beating, and everyone singing, Hoshana, help us, Creator, help us. Just imagine. And imagine my surprise when 3 days after Sukkot on the farm last year, the farmer where we had the festival called me and said, hey, can you guys tone down the water ritual just a little bit? Because apparently a deluge of rain had flooded their drought-parched fields. Well, 2,000 years ago, when the temple was destroyed, the fire of our people was put out. And I wonder, where did that fire go? My best answer is that when we go to any synagogue across the world, most likely you'll find a little LED light hanging above the Torah ark. It's probably very energy efficient. But that symbol, as beautiful as it is, no longer is enough to feed the next generation. They want those symbols brought back to life. They want a Judaism on fire. In 2013, the Pew Report came out and showed us an alarming trend that the next generation is not affiliating like the previous generation. But perhaps they missed something. Maybe they didn't measure the right thing. Because 1 year later, a new report came out called Seeds of Opportunity. And in that report, it studied the emerging Jewish outdoor food farming and environmental education field, the likes of which Wilderness Torah is doing by bringing multi-generational community back out into nature. Or Pearlstone Farm in Baltimore, by gathering people and doing education on the farm. Or Adama, the Jewish farm in Connecticut. Or the Urban Jewish and Social Justice Farm in Berkeley. Or Shorish Farm in Toronto. Or the Eden Village Camp in the Hudson Valley of New York. They are relighting the fire all across the Jewish world. And the next generation is flocking to that fire. Take John Wolfstone, for example. He grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado, and his normative synagogue experience didn't quite have the spark that he was looking for. And the anti-Semitism that he encountered in high school and in his community convinced him that Judaism was not his thing, and he just dropped it. Well, when he heard of the opportunity to do Sukkot on a farm, connecting Judaism and nature, he said, I'll take a chance. So in 2013, at Sukkot on the farm, he told me the story of his experience at the Torah service. We were reading the Torah, and we were counting the ancient festivals at Sukkot when it began to rain. Now John leapt for his rain jacket and thought he would scrabble out like everyone else and find cover as the rains began to fall. But to his surprise, no one ran for cover. Instead, everyone ran out of the sukkah, except for those reading the Torah, who continued out of the sukkah and began to dance in a circle spontaneously, drums playing, guitars going off, and people were excited. And John said he felt an electricity pulse through that circle, the likes of which he had never felt before. He told me that in that moment, he discovered that in Judaism, he can experience something alive and that he had a spiritual home. So I am not saying that we should all again go back and become farmers, but I am saying that by small acts, spending time in nature, remembering where the moon is during the holidays, or by bigger acts, lighting a fire after Havdalah and gathering and telling stories, or perhaps supporting or partaking in the programs of a Jaffe organization, or maybe even founding a new Jewish farm in your community, or doing festivals on the land, or just by remembering the earth-based traditions of Judaism together, we can rekindle that fire for profoundly changing times. Thank you.